Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our panel today. And thanks to our panelists for making time to discuss this important topic. My name is Alan Thomas, and I'm the Chief Solutions Officer at Leadership Connect. If you talk to any leader of an organization and ask them what is their most important priority, they're very likely to say people. So we have with us today two guests. Catherine Kelly is the Chief Human Capital Officer for the U.S. Space Force, and Tammy Crum is a Cyber Branch Chief at the U.S. Naval Surface Warfare Center in Dahlgren, Virginia. We chose these two panelists to discuss topics related to DoD's technology workforce because they represent two important but different leadership viewpoints. One from a very top of an organization leading the entire human capital function, and one you might say from the trenches, leading a technical team in the fast-paced and ever-changing cyber domain. Kate and Tammy, thanks for being with us. Starting with you, Kate, can you maybe spend a minute or two, tell us a little bit about your current role and just give us a brief summary of your background?
Sure, Alan, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here with you and the group collectively. Very much appreciate the invite. So I'm the Chief Human Capital Officer for the United States Space Force. I also go by another title of the S1, which is a typical military parlance for the function that is in charge of people. So I have a couple of different titles, but I'm really privileged to be starting and leading the people enterprise for the Space Force. A couple of questions that I always get. We're not sure who you are and what the Space Force is, so I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that today. My background is actually mostly with Army. I was a commissioned logistics officer in the Army in a former life, spent about 18 years working for the Army in a variety of jobs, mostly as a civilian once I got off active duty. And I'm most recently coming from Army Futures Command, where we worked on a startup there to modernize the enterprise for Army. Very, very happy to be here with you today, and I look forward to this discussion.
Great, thanks, thanks, Kate. Yeah, no, you have an impressive background, and we definitely will touch on some of the work you've done in the Army. I'm reminded that amateurs talk strategy, right, and professionals talk logistics, right? So it's a good background to have. Tammy, how about you? Can you give us just a little more color on your role and a little bit about your background, and then we'll start to work into some questions.
Sure. So to recap, I'm the cyber testing branch head at Naval Surface Warfare Center, Dahlgren Division, specifically dam neck activity down in Virginia Beach. The focus of the work that goes on within my group is I have one of the 12 NSA certified DoD red teams. I'm responsible for doing the recruiting, workforce development, business development for all things red team. I also have individuals that support the National Cyber Range. I've been with the organization for 13 years. I did do an enlistment active duty focused on doing layman speak electronics technician work for combat systems on board U.S. Navy ships. I transitioned out of the Navy, went to school full time. I have a bachelor's of science in computing and security technologies from Drexel University. I came to work at DamNec, starting out very, very low within the organization, learning how DoD was doing DIACAP at the time, doing assessments across a ton of systems. I got into doing analysis for a group over at NIOC Norfolk with their red team of, hey, looking at some findings, this is your likely avenue to be able to exploit the system. I've been brought in quite a few times to do assessments across different networks, helping with cyber engineering. I've done stuff from the sysadmin stuff. So you think about like the full spectrum of cyber work. I've done pieces across a large array.
That's great. Yeah, no, appreciate it. Always good to have somebody in the conversation who's had hands on keyboard, so to speak, right? So thanks, thanks for that. And just a reminder to the people who are joining us, if you have questions for either Kate or Tammy or both of them, go ahead and chat those in, and then we'll handle those. I have a couple of things to hit lead off with. So this is a question for both of you, and I think it's going to be really fascinating to hear kind of your different perspectives on this. Kate, we'll start with you. But so in February of this year, the Deputy Secretary signed out the Cyber Workforce Strategy, right? Which, and I'm going to quote here from the strategy, it says it aims to set the foundation for how the Defense Department identifies, attracts, develops, and retains cyber human capital. Can you give us just a sense from your perspective, Kate, out at U.S. Space Force, how have things changed for you since the end of February when that framework was signed out? And then Tammy, we'll come to you with the same question.
Thanks for the great first question. I think it's a great place to start, Alan. Interestingly, I think I would say it doesn't feel like it's changed a lot, and here's why. Because the Space Force is a pretty niche set of talent. One of our 4 functional areas is cyber. And so when Space Force stood up at the end of 19 and really started to build itself out in 20, 21, and 22, the questions that are contemplated and the strategy itself and some of the solution sets that are outlined in that product, we actually had some interactions and engagements to help set those conditions. And so we're very, very excited for the codification of that strategy. But I would tell you that the Space Force has been looking to build that kind of cyber competencies across the spectrum of what we do. And I'm really excited that Tammy's on here today with me, because the juxtaposition of what it takes to protect in the cyberspace, along with what it takes to operate in the Space Force domain, is really an interesting narrative that we could kind of pull some threads on today. What I'm thinking about in the Space Force is, how do we continue to attract interest into the Space Force, specifically with people who have either the aptitude to learn or already have cyber skills? And I'm talking about both military and civilians here in the Space Force. And then almost as importantly, how do I continue to retain those skills and fight against skill atrophy, which is, quite frankly, in my opinion, one of the hardest things to deal with. There's the challenge of getting people into system. What we do pretty well in the services today is hold on to people once we get them in. But in the technical space, especially like in the cyberspace, you really have to stay beyond the bleeding edge of what's changing in this area. And I think that's pretty much the biggest focus area for Space Force, is to continue to build out and build the bench, so to speak. But we're starting to shift the aperture to some of the content that you saw in that strategy that is really focused on retention, and retention of people with relevant skills that are not dated and behind the power curve, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that is a topic that we will explore a little more, particularly around how do you keep people's skills fresh. I was just sort of thinking about when that was signed out in February. I don't think we were all talking about Chat GPT at that time, right? And now, kind of now we are, right? AI and large language models, right, is sort of the flavor of the day. So it's like, in a space that moves so quickly, right? How do you kind of keep up and keep people's skills fresh? So we'll come back to that. Tammy, how about you, in terms of the cyber workforce strategy, right? A big, kind of a big strategy, a big policy that the department rolls out at your level for your team. What do you see? Do you see did things change? Did it feel sort of the same, or did things get better? Do you see areas for improvement? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I don't see a whole lot of change in the way that we've done business, right? So we, as a working capital funds organization, we have to stay relevant with the technology that's out there to be able to keep people employed. We have groups of people that have the initiative to constantly seek out to learn the technology, pipelines, stuff like that. And I totally just went brain dead on the rest of the question, and I apologize.
No, it's okay. Yeah. So in terms of that big cyber framework, right, that the department signed out, right? Is that, do you, and you're in the trenches, right? You're kind of first line. did you feel a change on March 1st when you came into work, right? Are you thinking about doing things differently? Did it put new tools or give you the ability to do something different that maybe you weren't doing before, or did it help you just think about the problem maybe in a different way than you were thinking about it previously?
No, I I wouldn't say that that drove changes in thinking about the way that we're doing stuff. I think the release of the 814003 manual and where they're relooking at certs has had a bigger impact of where you could have had workforce that was considered qualified before with certain commercial certs that may have to look at, does that keep you qualified the way that they haven't done a full look across all the commercial vendors for certification.
Okay. So is that going to drive for your team and your organization, is that going to drive the need to get people some different certs or recertify? Is it going to kind of drive additional training that needs to happen, or?
We'll have to look at those type of things. In reality, our group, the type of work that they do is so niche, like even the previous policy, like most of the workforce falls under the 541 series for vulnerability assessor. They accepted things like CEH, which in actuality doesn't demonstrate that you have keyboard skills. You could have individuals that had bachelor's degrees. It still doesn't show that you can do stuff safely on a keyboard. So what we typically look for are individuals that have the offensive security certifications in addition to other things. It was a little disappointing to see with the newest release that it still didn't accept certifications from those type of vendors. I'm optimistic as they go forward. There has been talks about continuing to look at what vendor certs will qualify by incorporating things like Chat GPT into how they assess those and cutting down the man hours to evaluate certifications, that in time that will become acceptable.
Okay. All right. Good. Yeah. Then that's good. Yeah. Hopefully you feel like you have a channel, right, to get that feedback up and say, hey, you need to consider some sort of changes here. My sense is on documents like that, it's always a living document, right? But DoD can sometimes be a little slow to update to update things. Okay. Good kickoff. Maybe let's shift gears just a little bit. Kate, I teased this
Alan, can I interject for just one second?
Absolutely, yeah. If you want to add on to that, go for it.
Just a thought. Totally understand and fully appreciate what Tammy was just saying there. And I think it's important, I suspect, for at least some of your listeners to realize that, especially when we're talking about DoD civilian positions, the governance and the classifications reside outside the DoD in OPM. And the Office of Personnel Management really holds the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. And the last time I checked, although I'm very encouraged by the fact that they are looking at a classification for software development as a skill set inside of the federal workplace, which quite frankly has not existed by and large. We've had very discrete things like 2210 series IT professionals that have been splintered throughout the years. But really, if you think about the growth and the proliferation in the technical space for skill sets across the Department of Defense, and I am just talking civilians right now for the moment, OPM really needs to catch up to the game and make sure that we've got classified positions with the right skill sets that are credentialed the right way, which is the point Tammy's making. In this particular space, having a degree 20 years prior and doing a job for a year at the lower grade is absolutely not relevant to the technical space that we're all operating in. And things like certifications are where it's at. So we've got to continue to use our voice, especially the power of the DoD voice, to shape how OPM thinks about what really is a qualification in these niche spaces, especially in things like cybersecurity and technical skills like software development.
No, that's a good point. Give us a little insight, Kate, if you can, on how does DoD get that message to OPM? Is it through the CHICO, through the Chief Human Capital Officer Council that happens? Is there sort of a direct a direct line to Administrator Ahuja there? What's the how does DoD make their concern known?
Yeah, so what I'm encouraged by is that OSD personnel and readiness is fully cognizant of this issue, and they've got to continue to push on OSD and OPM to make sure that these changes are happening. And I'm very pleased because I know that a lot of people are putting pen to paper to try to get to this point. But there's all sorts of other venues, especially in DC, where these conversations have to happen. So things like Chico councils, opportunities where we can get in front of, quite frankly, the Hill and talk about why the federal entities that are responsible for civilian employment on the federal side need to kind of get us with the times with respect to how we qualify people for these standards. We kind of have to hit it from multiple angles because one channel probably won't get it done.
Sure. Yeah, no, makes sense. Yeah, good. No, thanks. Thanks, Kate. Kate, for that. Yeah, so yeah, good conversation, and we'll come back to a couple things. Tammy, maybe let me go to you, and maybe can you just give us a sense in terms of your team, right? For the kind of folks, and I know you said you're hiring for very specific type of people, right? In fact, I heard both of you use the term niche capabilities, right? Space Force is broad, it's got a big mission, right? But you're sometimes looking for niche people. What are you doing, Tammy? What's your team doing to attract and retain that kind of niche technical talent that you're looking for? And I mean, the reason I'm asking this is there may be people listening who are looking for good ideas, right? That they haven't thought of yet. And so sometimes, it's always great. It's great to create a new idea yourself, but sometimes it feels even better to borrow a good one, right? So we're kind of looking for potential good ideas here. Can you give us maybe a little bit of a sense for what you're doing around attracting and retaining that niche talent?
So for attracting, whether it's somebody coming just out of college, somebody that has been around industry for a while, we do have a pretty good training program internally to help to develop those capabilities. They have qualification standards that they hit for like apprentice, journeyman, master level operators. The incentive to get to there is they get a special pay beyond their typical government salary as like a retention incentive per level that they qualify at. They're pretty standard across DoD red teams at this point. They do share across organizations as to, hey, what is your journeyman level operator incentive look like? So there isn't a case of where I work for one team, oh, I could make more money to go to another team. The camaraderie internal within the team is an important factor of why folks tend to stay with that group rather than seeking out going to industry where they could make more money. Things that attract them to stay on that team is that you have the ability to test systems that you wouldn't see in the commercial sector.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, thanks, Tammy. Is the incentive, that must be some sort of special authority? Is that something government wide? Do you know? I'm not familiar with it.
It is something that had gotten worked here a few years before I had came into the position, but it is separate from the 2210 special pay stuff that OPM has released. And it is unique just for red team operators.
Okay, got it. Thanks. Yeah, appreciate that. Kate, maybe let's go to you. Let's step back a little bit, right, from the day to day, and just give us a sense. You've got this very interesting background. You mentioned you did a long time in the Army. You were an officer in the Army, and then you transitioned to civilian. You were at Army Futures Command, right, which is sort of a new start command within the Army, right? And now you're at Space Force, which is sort of like a new start, kind of a new start organization as well, right? So can you maybe give us just some sense for having had both of those experiences, and you're obviously in the middle of your Space Force experience now, but what are some lessons learned from kind of doing a new start, particularly around people, But in a big organization like in the Army or in the Department of Defense, can is there some wisdom you can share with our listeners there?
Sure. A couple of things that come to mind that are quite relevant to both the previous experience and the current. The first, in my experience, we're talking about a startup and a merger and an acquisition. And what do I mean by that? In Army Futures Command, when we stood up that new command, 4-star level inside of the Army, we really pulled the scientific and lab professional community that was, quite frankly, a little bit disparate across the Army, pulled it together, and then grabbed a couple of other existing entities, and then stood up a whole new headquarters itself at the top, in this case in Austin, Texas. And I start there because in that scenario, it was both a starter and a startup and an M&A, which quite frankly, for those of you who are listening from the commercial sector, generally speaking, nobody would be crazy enough to try to do both at once, right? You do one or the other, but you certainly don't try to do both. And in this case, in Army Forum, that's exactly what we did. So some of the lessons learned from that kind of very much connect with what I'm doing now in Space Force is to never underestimate the power of being the new thing in an ecosystem that didn't change at all. And so when you're the new thing, you attract a certain type of people to your new idea or your new entity. And we can talk a little bit about what I've conceived as 3 groups of people who a startup attracts. But what happens is you can really, if you do a really good job of marketing this new thing, you get a lot of people who are coming and they're expecting it to be wholly different, feel very different, and operate very differently than perhaps what their previous experience was. And what I think one of my biggest lessons learned is to manage the people impact of when you find that you may be new and your organization may be new, but the system around you, the bureaucracy in the case of the federal government, didn't change at all, right? And so the downward pressure from the external bureaucracy pushing against the startup that's trying to get off its knees and stand is inherently the challenge that any startup inside of the DoD has. And I have 2 instances that prove my theory, at least I think I'm almost proving it. I don't know if I need a third to prove it, but it's the very same problem today with the Space Force is that the Department of Defense hasn't changed much. Laws are the same, funding is very similar, policies are there, existing services already do the jobs per se. And now you've got this inject of an entirely new thing, and you get the same clash of tension between what's already in the system around the new entity. And so there's a whole lot to unpack there from a people perspective. But probably the most important things that I would offer the listeners today is how do you manage people feeling good and coming to work and operating at the sprint pace that you have to operate at when you're a startup? Because if you don't show value fast enough, the downward pressure of the ecosystem crushes you, right? But while people are sprinting, you have to keep an eye on how they can stay in this for the long game. And you have to make sure that you're managing expectations on the part of the workforce when things get tough and things get hard and you're constantly fighting to get different initiatives across the table. So those are some themes that I found common between the 2 experiences. Obviously, they're different at echelon, but I think the problem sets remain very similar.
Mm-hmm. Just one quick follow-up on that. You mentioned sort of 3 types of people that you think are attracted to kind of a startup, especially a startup within a government organization. Can you just expand on those just a little bit?
Sure. So there's what I call the runners. Those are the people that are running towards the light, and the light is the new thing that they're very excited about. Then there's the people who are getting away. Those are the people who are just trying to get away from where they were previously because they're dissatisfied. So you've got two groups. One is a believer, and one is just, I want to get out of where I'm at. The third group, in my opinion, is the most important. The third group are the fence riders. That's the group you've got to get, right? You've got to get the people who are just sort of trying before they buy, and you want as many of those to fall on the side of the runners, so that you can build enough momentum in the startup to make this thing endure.
Mhm. That's interesting. Yeah, you've got people running to something and people running away from something, right? And then and then people somewhere in the middle. Yeah, no, that's good. Thanks for that perspective. Tammy, let's come to you. Maybe give us a sense. Give us a sense for what kind of people are attracted to working on a red team at Dahlgren, right? Like what maybe they're not runners to or runners from, or maybe they are, right? But can you give us sort of a sense for what kind of folks do you find are in some sense are self-selecting, right, and coming and coming to you, right, for that kind of work?
So you have the people that are consistently inquisitive on how things work. They're the individuals that when their 8 hours a day are up, they don't stop learning or trying to figure stuff out. Um, they're the ones that are setting up homegrown labs at home on how do I learn to break into this type of technology. Um, a, when you look at the dynamic in that group, majority of the folks on that team are either post-military, they got exposure to that type of work. Um, they could have been in occupations within the military that they're like, hey, I don't want to do this work. Cyber sounds interesting. And they've had that aptitude to learn additional stuff. And then we have the spectrum of there's people coming out of college like, hey, I got a cyber degree. What does that mean? And we recruited them sophomore year into the DoD Cyber Scholars Program, and hey, here's an internship opportunity. Let's go ahead and teach you things and steer where your last 2 years of college go, and then to develop them into pen testers and red teamers.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Tell me more about the scholars program. If you know a little more about that, do you have just like 30 seconds on that? It sounds like an interesting program, and that's DoD wide. So anybody in
It
DoD.
is. It
Yeah.
is, and there's information on it on cyber.mil in a gist of what it is. At some point in your degree program, you apply to that program. They look to make sure that the schools you're going to are part of those NSA endorsed Center of Excellence, right? So understanding that somebody's evaluated the curriculum, it's not a fly-by-night school, that you're legit like learning cyber stuff. If you get selected for the DoD Cyber Scholars, they pay for a portion of your degree in exchange for however much they pay. You're obligated to perform service for the federal government in exchange. Like if they paid for a year of college, you owe a year back. They take applications for the individuals. We get resumes. They reach out to various organizations within the federal government and say, hey, we're going to do the draft for who gets selected for scholarships for this year. We get the opportunity to go through to look at people's applications and say, hey, I want to enter a draft for these 3 individuals. And you could have NSA that looks to pick them up, CISA, an organization within DoD, they end up getting mapped in with an organization. And when they get mapped, that means, hey, we're agreeing to give them an internship opportunity for the remainder of the time that they're in school. So they end up with a resume that says, hey, I've got demonstrated cyber experience. And then successfully completing that internship, they are offered full-time employment after they get their degrees.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like a great program. The one for one is also nice, right? Sometimes you'll see, kind of 3 days of payback for every day of school or something like that, right? So one for one is nice. Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for providing a little more detail on that. Kate, sort of building on that theme, maybe can you talk a little bit about, from the Space Force perspective, what are you all doing in terms of working with academia or the tech industry that maybe is unique to Space Force? Maybe there are some things that are DoD wide that you're taking advantage of, like the Scholars Program that Tammy talked about, but can you give the listeners some sense for maybe what Space Force is doing, again, working with colleges and universities and with specifically with the tech industry?
Sure. Yeah. And I think Tammy's spot on with what she just described in terms of ways to deliver new into the DoD. What she described in that program that is so powerful is not only structuring a package that financially is helpful to the student, but most importantly, in my opinion, or in my experience, is that landing spot and that commitment of a job at the tail end of the program. And so she just described some of those across the DoD being landing spaces for this type of talent. That's exactly what we need to do across the department, and exactly what we try to do in Space Force as well. Through programs like that, as well as some more targeted ones, where we're bringing in potential young talent in a variety of areas, because on our civilian side, we're looking for people who are interested in the acquisition fields, the engineering perspective, the tech side of both cybersecurity, as well as basically what we need to be at in terms of our space operations and development. And then, of course, we have our intel that we also build pipelines for, in addition to our space operators. So trying to inject relationships on the first part of your question with academia is a huge focus for us. So what we did specifically was establish a university partnership program that's about 2 years old now. In my opinion, that's still relatively new. But we did two things when we set that up. We intentionally looked for schools whose, I'll call it academic sweet spots, were relevant to the Space Force needs. So you can imagine that those schools are heavily STEM focused. And then we also looked for, because we were also interested in down the road building ecosystems to help us problem solve in their R&D side of academia, as well as force generate potential guardians, both military and civilian, through either ROTC scholarships, if the schools already had those programs, or through direct civilian hiring actions using methodologies very similar to the one that Tammy just described. So our university partnership program has a multitude of schools in it now. We're kind of looking at the effectiveness of those ROTC pipelines and those civilian hiring opportunities so that we can then make some value judgments about expanding that in the future. The other piece that I think is important on the tech side is that these schools that we've partnered with have very robust and really powerful research arms. And that was one of the other criteria that we used when we developed the down select for this consortium of schools. And what we're doing is building, I would say, kind of a dialogue with Congress to start to give us a research pipeline of funding that we can then use to leverage the ecosystems of R&D that academia makes available. And if many of your listeners are likely in either an academic ecosystem or in the tech community, and we know that the technical communities are very much partnered with academia as well, especially on the front end of R&D. So we're trying to build that kind of foundational aspect so that we can tap into both problem-solving aspects from these schools and from these companies, as well as create talent pipelines into the Space Force.
Got it. Thank you. Just curious, right? There was a lot of obviously a lot of media coverage when Space Force was created, right? It was very much in the news. Did people reach out to you? Did schools or tech companies reach out to you, particularly in the? I mean, I know probably lots of companies reached out and said, "Oh, geez, we'd love to do work for the Space Force." You know, I mean, hey, okay, great, we've got a procurement process. You know, follow the process, right? But in terms of thinking about human capital and providing people, right, and trying to do some kind of partnerships like that, did you find, just given the amount of coverage, did you get a little bit of deal flow, for lack of a better term, that kind of came to you all versus you having to kind of go out and try and establish those relationships?
I would say that's true, and I would say that was probably one of the harder challenges, was down selecting to a small group of schools that we felt had sufficient offerings through our criteria to make the relationship valuable for both of us. And when you're a startup, like the service really is, you really have to be careful. And the momentum you're describing when the first media blitz happens on a big announcement, you have to be really careful that you don't bite off more than you can chew, right? Because there is so much to be done when you are brand new and you are trying to get established, that you have to be really intentional about the good ideas that you also take on. And so there were many schools that went to partner, some of which we were able to say yes to, not all, but we have absolutely maintained all those relationships with them so that when we get to a point of maturation, where we can expand the program, we'll likely do so. And you can quite imagine that there's a huge amount of appetite and interest in the partnership. But just as much as we're looking for those schools to offer value to us as a service, I think we owe that back to them as well, right? And as an academic institution, they need to make sure that they're getting something that's good for their institution as well. So the phase we're in right now is proving out that mutually benefit relationship, and then we go from there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point about capacity, right? And it might actually help some people who are listening, right? Just in terms of, the Army is, several 100,000 people in uniform and a group of civilians that are that many at least, right? Kind of supporting them, right? So you're talking about Army or Air Force, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in those organizations, right? Give us a sense, Space Force. When we say Space Force, are we talking, hundreds of thousands of people? Are we talking, 2,000 people, 5,000 people, right? Give us some sense, just so that people can get a sense for the scale difference, maybe.
Yeah, we're barely a division in the Army. So to give you some numbers, we have 8,600 military guardians today, and roughly 8,000 civilians. So we hover with loss and people coming on. We're old enough now where we have both people leaving and coming. We're hovering right around the high 15,000 to 16,000 people, and that's thousand and not thousands. So
Right.
We're tiny, right? And that's a blessing and a curse, as you would imagine. It's a blessing in the sense that you can do some really interesting innovation and experimentation, which we may talk about later on with some wearable tech devices that we're using. The curse is that you are always, oversaturated with tasks to be operating at the pace and the scale that other services are able to operate at. And so, there's some agility that you can get from being small, and then there's the tyranny of being so small that your voice isn't heard inside of that larger ecosystem. And that's a challenge that we fight on a daily basis.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, there is a certain quality to quantity, right? Sometimes. So yeah, no, that's good. Tammy, let's come to you. You touched on this a little bit in one of your answers. I think when you talked about kind of a training program that you have. Let's talk a little bit about reskilling, right? So I know at the beginning of our conversation, we talked a little around the idea of trying to sort of keep pace with change and always find people who have kind of current skills and bring them into the organization. But that can be tough, right? It can be tough. You're out there competing with lots of companies in the private sector. There are all kinds of different incentives out there. Sometimes the kind of work you're doing is not for everybody who has those skills that you're looking for. What do you do? Is there anything you're doing, either kind of that's a Navy program or something even maybe that's specific to your organization, to reskill people, right? Maybe to take people who are, for lack of a better term, good athletes, right? And kind of, reskill them or, skill them up, right? Get them kind of current, right? They're people who are already they bought into the mission of the organization, right? They love that. They want to stay. What are some things you're doing to sort of get them the right skills so that they can be productive and contributing members of the team?
Yep. So say you have somebody that is very green for cyber, or somebody that is coming through on a DoD skill bridge program that is looking to get into red team type work. We have for lack of better words, a group that's considered like a purgatory team that has an established curriculum of by week. These are skills that you need to master to progress them through what needs to happen to get them on a keyboard, uh, doing operational type assessments, um, for them to progress through that established curriculum. Towards the end of it, we have a custom developed, like capture the flag environment that serves as their capstone program, before they progress from that purgatory team into the apprenticeship pipeline. Once they enter an apprenticeship pipeline, we do have particular vendors that we work through on commercial training that help to get them certified as apprentice. There's a list of qualification check type things that they need to do as part of that certification track to become apprentice, like 2 courses, certs, going through this laundry list of check boxes to show that you've demonstrated these skills. They finish that up, they can progress onto journeyman, kind of lather, rinse, and repeat, vendor type training, hands-on skills for those things. When we look at somebody that has been operating for some time and we're looking to go into different areas of testing that maybe they haven't had that exposure, there's leveraging other DoD entities have that background, the federal government, who the commercial sector has that expertise in kind of making those relationships. There's partnerships with various academic organizations as well to kind of like leverage what they've learned. What did you do to get this stood up so they're not starting from ground zero? Some of that conversation is what did you do to train your individuals in this area, and then looking to kind of mirror that.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing those. Kate, maybe come to you, and as a human capital practitioner, maybe you can just help us sort out some terminology. We talked a little bit about reskilling. You hear people say things like upskilling. For people who aren't kind of in the human capital world, when you hear those 2 terms, are they the same thing? And then what's Space Force doing in terms of reskilling and or upskilling?
Yeah, I think it sort of depends on your perspective as to whether the phrases mean exactly the same thing or not. But I think the intentionality behind them is common, right? It's the idea that the community and the world around us, this is how I view it at least, is moving so quickly in this technological space especially, that the presumption that you can adjust your workforce models in the current situation fast enough to stay current with that dynamic environment around you is pretty much a flawed assumption. I mean, and again, this is just my perspective. So whether you call it reskilling, upskilling, or whatever, the point is, it's all about relevancy of the workforce for the work that you're trying to do and the momentum you're trying to build for the organization. And so what I think about and what my team very much works hard on is, how do you look at the ecosystem of people that you have in your organization, most importantly, all the way down to the lowest level, and identify the people who have the interest or the aptitude to be either changed in what they do on a day-to-day basis or additive to what they do on a day-to-day basis. And I think one of the most interesting things about where we are right now, especially in the federal workspace, is there was a lot of talk 5 years ago, 3 years ago, about we need to inject more tech people into our federal world, right? Because let's face it, for many, many years, we kind of outsourced the real hands-on keyboard technical expertise. And that's why the things that Tammy and her team do on behalf of the Navy in that case are so incredibly important, because we've got to have that type of technical expertise inside the federal government and inside the DoD, especially for all the obvious reasons. So the thing that I really focus on is, inside of the workforce that we have today, we all need to be technically literate. Some of us have to have hands on keyboards, but others of us need to understand how to build processes and policies and bridges by which we can be literate with our workforce about the technical things that they deliver, or I'm the person who's actually delivering the technology. And data is another piece of this. We spend a lot of time talking about all this philosophical data that we need. For those of us in this business, as you're trying to morph the federal government to get us close to the agility of the private sector, we have to own and live every day that every one of us in the Space Force has to be technologically relevant in what we do as a contributor inside the Space Force. So that means I need to understand data before I make a policy decision. I need to have the procedures in place to make somebody's onboarding a seamless experience. I need to make sure that I'm finding guardians who have an interest in understanding how to code, and I'm giving them an opportunity through forums like Digital University, as an example of what we do in the Space Force, to allow them to learn how to actually be hands-on keyboard and understand coding script, and then deliver a crowdsourced application for the Space Force. So if any of your listeners jump on to Google Play or the Play Store for Apple and you look up Guardian One, there's a pretty basic but really exciting app there that was completely crowdsourced and developed by Guardians who were already in the service with another job. And they learned it and they built it and they deployed it through the App Store. And to me, that's upskilling, right? I didn't pull them necessarily entirely away from the day-to-day that they were doing, although sometimes it took a little bit of time. But some of them who were on that development team learned how to do it on their own time at night through some online resources, and then brought it to bear on a known challenge inside of the Space Force. To me, that's what we're after, right? Crowdsourcing ideas, finding the talent that has the interest and the aptitude, and offering an opportunity for them to kind of upgun what they can do inside that tech space.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great example. I want to pull the thread a little bit more. And Tammy mentioned this also, when I asked her about the kind of people that sort of self-select for this, right? She said, oh, they're people that are sort of curious, and they'll, hey, even after they're done at work, they might go home and they've got like a little mini lab set up in their house, and they're sort of tinkering and doing things. You see this sometimes in the tech industry where companies will create some space in the course of a normal work week for employees to sort of tinker, right? To basically have a little bit of time. Hey, it's a 40 whatever hour work week, right? We're going to give you 4 hours every week or 4 hours every pay period, where kind of on the clock you can explore a problem that is that is interesting to you, right? I mean, ultimately, like it to be kind of relevant, right? It's not working on your fantasy football team or something like that, right? But should be sort of relevant to the organization, but kind of explore a problem that maybe isn't part of your day to day. I guess I'll start with you, Kate, but come to you, Tammy, too. Is there anything like that that's happening in Space Force, or have you heard anything like that in DoD, where you kind of officially give people a little bit of space to play around and maybe come up with some ideas like that could be ultimately useful to the organization?
So in the Space Force, I would say yes to that answer, but I would caveat the approach a little bit.
Okay.
We haven't gone so far as to say, here's a fenced amount of time that you can go do something else, right? But what we have said is that we value teamed solutions and creativity and innovation at the lowest level. We've gone so far as to kind of inculcate those themes that I just talked about in our core values as well. And so what we try to do is use every opportunity that we can inside of the communications, especially, to encourage people to solve their own problems, right? And to not discourage people taking initiative to do so. And a lot of that means you got to extend a little bit of trust. Somebody is working on something that's relevant, like you just talked about. And you've got to empower people to actually be focused on the important things. They've got to understand how they fit into the larger ecosystem, so that what they choose to work on is not just a fix my own little problem here, but fix something that's going to be on a greater scale for my organization, be it my squadron, the Delta level that I'm part of, or even a field command, as an example. And so I think what we try to do in the Space Force is encourage the creative thinking and make it known that we actually want your ideas. And I wasn't just throwing out the term crowdsourcing. We use that pretty often. We just rolled out, General Saltzman just announced our new mission statement as a new service 2 days earlier this week at the Air and Space and Cyber Symposium. And it's a simple mission statement from a very cumbersome and complex one that was written probably by 30 people who were fighting at the time. And it was crowdsourced from internal guardians in the Space Force, meaning we literally went out and said, tell us what you think and give us your ideas. And then we kind of pulled a small team together and they red teamed it from that perspective and came up with the new mission statement. So, basically securing our nation's interests in, from, and to space. Very simple. But every single word in that sentence actually has a very powerful meaning. And we wouldn't have gotten to that if we just tried to work it amongst the Pentagon. And we got to it because we actually pushed it out to the enterprise and said, you all tell us what you think the real value proposition is of the service. And it's that kind of encouragement of creativity that we try to proliferate throughout the service.
I like it. It doesn't sound like it was written by a team of consultants, which is good, right? It sounds like it was written by the people doing the mission, which is always good. Tammy, so just circling back to that question in terms of are you doing anything to give people a little bit of time and space to do some tinkering and exploring around problems that they may be interested in, but that are also relevant to the mission of the organization?
Yes, but by nature of the type of work that group does, it's a very high op tempo. There's a lot of demand for that skill set, small amount of bandwidth that they have. Technology changing, not uncommon that you can go into an assessment, security configurations could change, you start to hit a roadblock. The perseverance within that team, they're going to be determined to get in. If you hit a roadblock and you're struggling with how to get past it, they're going to do some research to try to understand a little bit more. They may be having challenges to get in to see what they can custom develop that can help them get past that. They'll collaborate as a team. Hey, this new technology was put in within DoD networks. It's giving us trouble getting past it. Okay, let's think through what that's doing and how can we circumvent that. They'll work, like I said, collaboratively within their own red team of figuring out ways to get past that. But they'll also reach out to others in the community and say, hey, have you done an assessment on this type of technology? What worked for you? What didn't work for you? So they're not spending time trying to try methods others hadn't been successful for. And then once somebody in the community finds out, like, hey, this particular thing, this is how you get past it, they share resources. You're muted.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry. That's great. And so there's you have some sort of forum where they can kind of share what they're learning, right? So people sort of like a knowledge base or something like that.
They do it across the wider community a couple times a year. Internally, it's every Friday. What things are you learning to keep everybody else on the team relevant?
Yeah, no, that's good. Good to hear. Let's maybe take a little bit of a step back and go back to the idea around attracting people. But maybe ask you a question. It's not really a technical question, right? But just sort of a sense for, we are, what, three years on from a pandemic, which for a lot of people changed the way they work. And we're sort of in this funny, period now where, some folks are back to the office, or they're back to the office part of the time, but not all the time. I know at my company, Leadership Connect, hey, we're in kind of two or 3 days a week in an office and then home for a couple of days. what we hear from folks who do recruiting for us, particularly for technical people, right, is, oh, lots of times they're looking for flexibility, right, and they can get that in some places. That can be challenging for both of the missions that your organizations have. I'm just curious, Kate, start with you. Any impact there in terms of kind of the changing way people seem to be working post pandemic, and what if anything is Space Force kind of doing to try and adapt to that, to a little bit of a new reality, certainly different than maybe when Space Force was first stood up?
I would say it's very different than when we were first stood up, because quite frankly, the inception of Space Force and the and the beginning of the COVID pandemic were almost on the same day. We're literally by a few months off. So, the first instantiation of Space Force was very difficult to try to get off the ground because of those challenges. I think you characterized it really well, with this whole description of, we're in this new phase, quite frankly, as a society, I would argue, about what is that acceptable balance depending on where you work and what you do. And I think the interesting thing for me is that everybody wants a conclusion of one way or the other. And I think, at least inside the department, and certainly inside Space Force, the only conclusion we've come to is that you have to literally ask the question relevant to the mission of the organization and the function that the individual performs. In our case, so much of what we require is done inside of secure compartmentalized spaces. It requires some specific, protections around it that, we don't have a huge amount of people that are, working at home full time. Although we do have pockets where that can be done. And we try to offer our supervisors as much flexibility that they can then offer the employee, as long as the mission is getting done. And, we have to make sure that in the Space Force especially, we remain very mindful of what's at stake here. Our service really is underpinning a lot of the way that every single one of us live a life every single day, right? The minute you pick up a smartphone and you use it to go somewhere with Google Maps, you have leveraged the Space Force assets and you have leveraged guardians. And there are guardians who are on 24/7 mission, making sure that that capability is relevant and operational on your phone. And so that's what, in part, we do for our nation. And that is only a piece of the unclassified side of what else we do. So we have to just be mindful that that's the main focus, and be as flexible as we're able to be beyond that demand.
Okay, yeah, no, makes sense. Tammy, how about for your team? Feels like it could be tough to have folks working remote there, but I'm just curious. I imagine it has to have come up in some context, right? Just given the shift that we've been through over the last 3 years. What does that conversation look like in your organization?
So pre-pandemic, it was not uncommon for an extensive amount of travel to need to be physically at the location you were doing an assessment against. Started the pandemic, very quickly capabilities had to be stood up to be able to do assessments remotely that you used to have to travel for. Capabilities set up to be able to do classified assessments remotely, like from our organization across the DoD to hit another organization. Unclassified operations, we did get capabilities set up to where operators could connect to our network and hit the targets, do those assessments from home. With the understanding, if it was a classified assessment, you obviously had to come into the building. You got a lot of people that really liked working at home, allow them to focus without the in-office distractions. There was the understanding, if it was classified, I don't want to hear the complaints. You're expected to come on site, get the work done. Most individuals had zero issues with that. I think we lost one person to another commercial entity over COVID. Post-pandemic, when there were thresholds for what you were allowed to do for telework as an organizational standard that didn't really look at like, hey, what does this individual actually do for work? Those weren't perceived very well. And we did have significant concerns with attrition. We did get our leadership to recognize like, hey, these aren't people that you're just going to go pick another one off the street to drop them in. We got to strike a balance. We've invested a lot of money into their training. So right now we do have some flexibility that's a little bit greater than other pockets within the organization. But there's still a decent amount of remote work going on. Our balance is that, hey, we would kind of strike the balance as to what teams were doing classified assessments, which ones were doing unclass, so they would get a little bit of flexibility as to where their work location would be. But we also face poaching from other organizations that are offering 100% remote to be a contractor, making way more than what civil service will ever make.
Sure. Yeah, there's a market for labor, right? And the labor is mobile, and so that that's just kind of the reality of it. Well, listen, we are at an hour, so we'll stop at 3. I want to thank both of you, Kate. Thank you for your perspective. Fascinating, great mission. Tammy, same. Thanks for providing the kind of frontline perspective there. Was great to hear about. I definitely learned something, and I think our listeners did too. So again, thanks to you both for taking some time out of your day and chatting with us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Bye all.